I'm having a massive heart attack. The ambulance driver, and I heard him say this very clearly. He said, she's not going to make it. All of a sudden, I felt like there was like a ponytail right here. And I got jerked and I got moved up to a higher consciousness. And I met the council of 12. They would go, and they would laugh. I thought, are they laughing at me? Then they said, you're just coming here to learn. And I thought, well, what am I learning? And I remember I started having profound experiences coming into my house. I remember all of a sudden, that's when Jesus came in. And so I thought, if I got Jesus sitting in here, I'm going to ask him every question I could ask. I asked him, I said, well, did we die? He said, you didn't. He said, you don't die. He said, your body will leave because the body is set for the earth. It goes back, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Your soul will leave and be moved out into a higher consciousness. Hi, my name is Virginia Drake, and I had a near death experience, but also I had several and I didn't even know it. But what you're going to be hearing about today is in 1998, the major NDE or near death experience that I had was in 1998. The week before, I was naturally very healthy, I was happy. I was 46 years old. I had a farm. I had a teaching professional. I was teaching at a Catholic school, and I was having a wonderful life in my life, or I thought I was anyway. I was just sitting in my den, and I was just watching some TV, and this man came in, and he was very strange. He was an older-looking man. He had oxygen, and he's telling everybody don't get a heart transplant. Well, I'm listening and I'm thinking, well, first of all, I have a real hard time with pills. And he was saying it, I take 93 pills a day. And I thought, 93 pills a day? Oh my gosh, that's got to be a horrible. And then I just immediately thought, I'm not going to do that. So he kept saying it, but what it was saying to me, it felt like he was saying directly to me on that television screen. And he kept saying, don't get a heart transplant. And I thought, and I even looked around the room thinking, because I knew I was the only one there. I thought, wow, is he talking to me? So I just kind of, okay. And he kept saying it over and over. And finally, I raised my hand and said, I will not get a heart transplant because I'm 46 years old. I am not going to do anything. I've got a great heart. I walk 4 miles a day. I do a lot of exercises. I'm in the garden. And so I never even, I just kind of thought, wow. Well, the next week, June the 2nd, 1998, I'm having a massive heart attack. And I thought it was, we were getting ready. School was already ended. So I remember when I went in there on Monday, I had all these kids and they were taking down the bulletin boards and we were all laughing. But I kept having this really pain in my chest, but it really was in my shoulder. And I would say, that really doesn't feel good. So I went downstairs and had some Coke. I thought, well, it's indigestion. I've been eating too much, doing too much, whatever. And I went back up and I thought, wow. But I remember bending over. This is what really threw me. I was bending over to my trash can and I just started dripping, perspiration just started dropping off of me. And I thought, now that's not normal because I don't perspire like that. And so I was kind of like, woof, that doesn't feel right. So I went down to my secretary and she looked at me and she went, I think you need to call your son or call your husband. And I thought, what? Because I had completely blent, just I did not have any color in my face at all. So I went straight and I had a hot tub. And so I thought, well, I'll just jump into the hot tub. So I got upstairs. I'm still having a hard time, like breathing a little bit. But my cats were upstairs with me because I had Ike and Tina, and they were just staring at me. And I'm an animal communicator by any means. That's what I've been doing for a long time. And my cats were looking so weird. They were just like on top of me. And I thought, that is really weird how they're acting. And so this beautiful voice, it's a voice that said, you need to go and look in the mirror in the bathroom. And I thought, hmm. So I remember walking in there and I was bleached out white. And all of a sudden, this other voice came and said, "You need to go to the emergency room now." And I thought, "Oh my God, there's something wrong." So I put my hands right there, went downstairs to my husband at the time, and I said, "I need to go to the emergency room." He said, "What?" "I'm on the phone with your doctor, and we're getting a new prescription because I was telling you about your having anxiety and what was going on with your heart." And I thought, I think I need to go. So he said, "Okay, we're going to go to the emergency room." So we came in. The nurse was there. I went to high school with her. Her name was Punky Brandenburg. And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I've got the worst pain." I said, "I think I've got acid reflux again." And there was another nurse in there with her, and it was a man. And he said, "Well, let's just take that stuff, that you did 3 weeks ago." And I said, "Okay, that'll be great." I thought that'll get over it. That went down and went straight out and ejected out of my mouth to the wall. And that's when everything just went into slow mo. I mean, they looked at me and they said, "You're having a heart attack." And I thought, did they just say I'm having a heart attack? And that's when I left my body, literally. I literally left my body and I kept thinking, I am confused. I'm very confused here. I don't, why did they say things like that? Because people don't understand when you go out of body, you're not even aware that you're in out of your body. I mean, I remember thinking I could see myself on the corner of the emergency room, but I'm still here. And then all of a sudden that came back and I came back into my body and I was looking at everything through my solar plexus, which is not possible. I mean, I've got a science background, so I'm going like this. That doesn't matter. So I remember they're all just screaming and moving, and everybody's, "We got to do this," but everything is in slow. It's like, "We got to do something." And I thought, are they talking about me? Well, then the next thing I know, my husband ran. Obviously, they called him and said that she's having a hard time. So he went and got the boys because he wanted the boys to be there. And then the nun that I was working with, Marcia, she said, "I'll go, I'll take her, I'll ride in the ambulance with her." And I thought, thank God. Well, you just can't imagine that was probably a good deal that I did. So they were still trying to work it out. It was like 3 or 4 hours. I had no idea I was still in the emergency 3 or 4 hours because I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. This is what I was trying to explain to nurses a lot of times. I said, when people are out of their body, and I said this to the nurses, you got to make sure they're in their bodies. If you're talking to them, they're not going to listen to what you're saying. They're just looking shocked. In this, I have several nurses that will come and visit me and ask me, especially ER nurses, they said, "Can we tell if they're out of body?" I said, "Absolutely." And I said, "I'll tell you how it feels like." I said, "They look blank." And I said, and they might be looking around, not even recognizing anybody, even though they know them, because you're no longer physically in your body. You're emotionally out. But I was coming out to go get in another emergency vehicle that was taking me to Lexington because they did not have enough room right then for to get me there. So I was like, but remember when the ambulance driver, he was helping take me, and I heard him say this very clearly. He said, "She's not going to make it." And I thought, I cannot believe that he would say that to me. Now, this is because I was out of my body. And when you're out of your body, you can hear anybody, what they think, everything. But when that was a whole experience. So I remember getting into the ER vehicle. So I mean the emergency vehicle. I got in and I was talking to somebody. Next thing I know, I was gone. I was out of the vehicle and I was riding beside it. And I thought that's not possible. That I can see me in the ambulance, but I'm over here. So I was really, really confused. In fact, I could even move myself just thinking I could see the driver. So I was supposed to be in the back of the car or the truck, and then he was up here, and I thought that doesn't make sense. That just doesn't. You're trying to literally trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I mean, there's so much stuff going on, and then all of a sudden I felt like there was like a ponytail right here, and I got jerked, and I got moved up to a higher consciousness, I guess. I went up into, and I met the council of 12. Now, I knew nothing about this. I never heard anything about that. But there were 12 beings in white robes, and they had gold tassels. And you knew they were gold. I mean, I don't know how to explain that. I try to explain this to people who've never had these because all of a sudden you know everything. You know everything about the universe. You know about you. You know about everybody. You see totally differently than you've ever been in your own self within your body. So I remember they were talking to me, and I thought, how can they talk to me? I can't see their mouths. And I remember I sat in a chair. I looked down, but I couldn't find my hands. I couldn't find my body, but I knew I was in a chair. And I would say, where am I? I mean, I'm trying to talk, but I'm in a room. I knew I was in a room, but I had a room that had like big windows, and I could go out of those windows and I could be in the stars. I could be in the universe. I could dance over here. I could go over there. All I had to do is just think, and you do something different. So you had to be learn how to to maneuver that, and you didn't even you never even knew you could do something like that. So I remember I was saying something. I said, "This is really weird. I don't know where I'm at." And these beings would lean down and they would go, and they would laugh. And I thought, are they laughing at me? Because I kind of took it personal because I thought, are they laughing at me? And they even laughed even more. And then, but I never could see their faces. I only could see the hood. And so then they said, you're just coming here to learn. And I thought, well, what am I learning? Wait a minute, what part of this? So it almost felt like a spaceship, that you could see, but it wasn't a spaceship. It wasn't that. Well, I remember I thought, look, there's a noble, and it went down because I have a science background, so I'm taught all of this. Look at the stars, and then I would think I was going to be at a planet, or I would be over here, and it would be like in seconds. I mean, multiseconds. It was not like a second here. It was like you done. And then I came back to the chair, and the next thing I know, I'm back into my body again in the ambulance. I remember going, how did this work? And I couldn't tell anybody because the pain was so excruciating when I would come back into my body. It was excruciating. So when I got into the other hospital, the thing that I remembered, and it still makes me cry, I had not seen my husband or my two sons yet. I just saw my friends. And all of a sudden, the nurse was coming and she said, we're going to take her out to the operating room because they were going to put a stent. What they were going to do is, heart cath. They're going to go through that and then whatever they had to do because the heart attack was pretty severe. And I remember thinking, this is going to be the last people I've got to ever talk to again. Ever. It's a real sobering thought. I'm not going to see my sons ever again. I felt it very clearly that this might be the last. And I remember crying as I'm going away from them. I thought, this is going to be the last people I've ever seen again. It still does. Now that's been, almost 27 years, but it still shakes you up. So I remember I was in, and the nurse comes in and she's doing this, and she's talking. She said, Miss, at that time I was somebody else. I wasn't divorced. So she's talking to me and she said, this is gonna be an easy thing. We're gonna do this. And I said, okay, that's cool, I'm all right. Once they relaxed me enough to get where I could breathe, I said to them, I said, look, I'm a teacher and I would like to watch this because they were going to cut into my aorta, and they have a little. It's like a little drill, and I said, "Would you let me see it? Because you're still awake. I mean, they have to put all of the dye in there. You're very awake. They're just making you so calm." So I remember the cardiologist, the doctor said, "Do you want to see this?" I said, "Absolutely. I'm going to teach it." And so he turned it around and he said, you're going to teach us. I said, absolutely. I said, everything I can teach a child, the more I can get information, I'm going to give that to them. So he said, okay. So I went through it, and I remember they were drilling. And as soon as they hit that clot, because I had a 99% clot in my aorta, I should have died. They called it the widowmaker. And I remember going, oh, well, I could just go back home now. That's what I thought I was going to do. I thought, well, gosh, I can just leave now. But I remember the woman, I was in the ICU, and the lady was there with me. And she was probably the age that I am right now. I'm 73 right now. So she was probably in her 70s. And I knew she was really sick. I knew that well, in fact, one of the nurses said, she's in the process of dying. And I thought, oh, and I'm going to be in the room with her. But we had a curtain. I could not see her. I could hear her. She could hear me. And I remember and in that room was the most amazing thing. I had angels that started coming in. I had a dot of light that was in that room with me in the corner. And I kept thinking, this must be really bad drugs because all I'm seeing is this light. And it just was, little bitty light. And the next thing, it starts getting bigger, bigger, and bigger. Now, I'm going to say it was Archangel Michael because that's who it looked like. And he was huge. He was bigger than the hospital. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. That can't be possible. And I remember him coming down and looking at me. He said, it's time to wake up. And then I had these angels after he left. He went like out to the hospital window. And I'm in the third floor. There's no way he could have gone through that window. But he was kind of like went in through the window, but he was waving at me and he's talking to me. And I thought, that's not possible. That can't be right. And so I remember thinking, okay, this is it. And then all of a sudden, all these angels started coming in, but you couldn't hear them. Now I'm in a room with a woman that has a curtain, and these angels were coming around and dancing around my room. There is no way they could have gotten through my bed like that. They were going through the wall, coming back around, and it was like that. And they were talking to me, and they were talking like this. And I thought, I don't even know what they're talking about. But as they're talking, this is going off and on all night long. And in the middle of the night, I would have thought it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm still having this, experiences. I'm having angels coming in. I'm seeing gold light coming in, and then it would go out, then it would come back in. I thought, what is that? Because the light was not the same. Because that's when you're going out of body, coming back in. And all of a sudden, this man comes in, and I heard him come in, and he sounds just like the National Geographic narrator. Now, I'm a teacher. I watch Learning Channel, National Geographic, so you recognize these narrators. It sounded just like him. And I thought, that is the weirdest thing in the world. That sounds just like the National Geographic narrator. So, yes, that lady did pass. And I remember the nurses came in and they said, well, we let her, she left. Or I think they said she left. I said, did she pass? And they said, yes. And I said, this is the wildest thing. I remember this one nurse, she was blonde. She was real, laughable and fun to be around with her. And she said, that was her son. I said, really? I said, he sounds just like the National Geographic narrator. And she said, that was him. He just came in from California. I went like this. I said, everything then that was going on over on my side of the room really was happening because Spirit literally made me see both sides. And there are two worlds. And I've learned this from the work that I've been doing with myself. There's two worlds. There's the world of God or the world of the universe, and then there's the world of man. They wheeled me into my room. My husband was there. My family doctor was there. Two other doctors were there, plus that doctor. And then the manager of the hospital was in there and they're discussing me. What can be done? This is called shock heart. And I thought, what are they talking? And they're talking about me, and I'm sitting in the bed, and nobody's discussing anything with me. So it kind of burnt me up a little bit because you're discussing something about me, but you're not involving me in what you're talking about. So I kind of raised up, and I heard them say, well, this is called shocked heart. And I said, I don't think it's shocked heart. I think it is a miracle that I'm alive. And I laid back down because I was afraid I'd have another heart attack. And my cardiologist looked at me and he said, why do you say that? I said, because I feel good like that. And because he had already given me the bad news. Oh my gosh, Lauren, he gave me the real bad news. They just told me if I do not have a heart transplant, I'm going to die in 6 months. So, I mean, I was preparing for that. I really thought that's it. And by not doing what they said to do, I did not want a heart transplant. That guy said it. I wasn't doing it. And so he said, you've had a change. Your heart has come back. And I said, what do you mean my heart's come back? He said, it's called shocked heart. It looks really bad. Because, I mean, I was gone. That my heart was not functioning or anything. And it came back miraculously. I think it still says it came back miraculously. And I remember coming back home and I said, because it was the first our summer break of the first day. So I had 3 months to recuperate. And I sat in a chair and I had a room called the angel room. And I thought, I just sat there. I did not talk to anybody. I cried a lot. I cried a lot. I couldn't believe that God was so grateful that I could even live through this. I mean, I started seeing the understandings of what really happened to me with the shock of the body and all of that. And I remember I started having profound experiences coming into my house. I remember all of a sudden that's when Jesus came in. And I remember when he walked in, I recognized him immediately because he looked exactly like my Jesus on my bulletin board, and I was the only one that had the smiling Jesus. And he came in, and I thought, he looks just like the smiling Jesus. And so I thought, if I got Jesus sitting in here, I'm going to ask him any question I could ask. So I said, first of all, I said, how come you look exactly as my smiling Jesus? He said, because that's the only way you would recognize me, the way you were, where you recognize. And it makes perfectly good sense because everybody says, I listen to a lot of NDEs that have been Jesus, and Jesus is a little different from them. Like some people have the darker Jesus, some people. And I realized this is what he said. He said, you're not going to recognize me, but only the way you've been given how I look. And that's exactly the truth. And that would be, because if Jesus was walking in a crowd with everybody, that's why everybody sees him totally different because they're only going to recognize him for what they have known. So I remember he gave me that, and I thought, well, that is the best. I've never had an answer like that. And he was telling me about, I asked him, I said, well, did we die? He said, you didn't. He said, you don't die. He said, your body will leave because the body is set for the earth. It goes back, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Now, I was a Bible girl because I was a Baptist before I was a Catholic. So I was very much about aware of the Bible. I thought, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's exactly what it would be like. Your body will go into particles. Your soul will leave and be moved out into a higher consciousness, which I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. But also I told him, I said, I can see things better than I've ever seen. And he said, so you see with your soul eyes, you're not seeing with your human eyes. And I thought, so you can see that? Well, I've always seen things because, like I said, I was an animal communicator. I'm an only child. So I had animals with me all the time, and animals talk to me. Now, everybody, my family, always thought I was just kind of making it up. No, I'm an animal communicator. I work with horses. I work with dogs. I work with people all over the world. So I've always had that ability. So, yeah, and I was talking to Jesus about that, and I'd say, how does that work? He said, because you're not working with your brain. You're working with your soul. And he told me all about my soul. He said, your soul is the spark of God. It is really what is the Father's. You are part of that. We're children of God. And then he sat down and he said, we're all children of God. Just because you're an adult today, you're still a child in God's, in Father's face. or God's eyes. I think that's what he said. I thought, well, that makes sense. We are. And he said, and your intelligence is not what you really want here. You want to have your spirit come enhanced, not your intelligence. Intelligence is human. When you're looking at your soul and looking at the supernaturalness of it all, it's a whole different ride, and it's a different you don't have to worry about anything. It all comes into enlightenment. I was sitting in a meditation, and he said, there's going to be a war, but you're not going to be a part of it, and I'm going to show you. He took me in a tornado, and I could see through the eye of the tornado, and he took me all the way through Middle East, and he was showing me what was going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. He said, but you're not going to get involved at all. And I remember I was sitting in the Kroger store, and these women were talking about the war, and I thought, war? What war is she talking about? Then we started talking, and then I realized that's what Jesus said. You will never even know it. I saw it. He said, but you will not get involved in it. And I never did get involved. I don't get involved in politics. I don't get involved in a lot of things in the world of man because that is in the world of man. Jesus doesn't want us to be in that world. We want to be in this world, into the eternal world. We've been programmed from our educational system, our parents, our town. There's all these rules that we've been following, but you don't have any written down rules, but you know there's certain kind of rules. And Spirit or Jesus would say, those rules are the rules of man. That's not the rules of God. There's only two rules, and that's love or fear. Either you got one or the other. You better find out what those mean to you because if you're in fear, you're in a whole different ride. Because I was afraid all my life until after my near-death experience that I remembered I don't have any fear about dying at all because you don't die. And I was trying to tell people, my friends, they would just go like this. I remember one of my friends said, well, you had a really bad heart attack. And you probably didn't have enough, oxygen in the brain. I said, no, my brain is fine. I'm seeing things. And it really, for the first 5 or 6 years, all I did was study. I got into my school the next year, and I only lasted 1 year because my higher self literally said, God said, Jesus said, whatever you want to, said, it's time for you to leave and you need to serve me. I left my teaching position at the age of 50 and started working. I created my business called Revisions to review it again. That's how I was trained by Jesus and other, entities that would come. They're not entities; they're beings of light, and they would come in and how to train me to use my brain in a different way to arc the electromagnetic fields. Because being science, I knew about the light. I knew about everything how it worked. So then when I saw quantum for the first time, because I can go out of my body from a meditation, I used to do meditations of 16 and 17 and 18 hours a day. That's all I did was stay in and go out into the universe, grab what I need, bring back, and bring it back and start teaching people. And I've been a teacher for the last 27 years teaching this. And I think it's the best thing I've ever taught in my life. And I've been traveling all over the world with this. So I know what I'm doing is the best thing I could ever do. And that was my near death experience. But my near death experience continued on. I mean, this is what made me become even more curious. I think you have to be curious to do this work and to go out and find out what the real truth is. And that's when everything came together. I mean, I was having people from New York. I mean, I had never advertised one. People heard about me. And at first it scared me that people would find me the way they, and then finally one day Jesus said, they're going to find you the way they need to find you, in the way that is done by the Spirit. So they're really needing you. That's why you know that's who you're supposed to work on. So I never had clients. I always had clients. I always had people that were asking questions, and I loved it. And I got to practice my skill on this. And that's when I got really good at quantum physics because I went out and I was taught quantum physics. Now I have a science background, so I did know it's physics, but I've never learned it like that over there. I learned something that I would not have ever been able to. I went over, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I was back. But I had learned so much. But now, time does not exist in the universe. It does not. You do not have an end or a beginning. It all runs because that's the eternity of it. That's what I learned is you're in eternity all the time. We just think that we are in our end. We have a beginning and an end. No, you are in the eternity of life. When you want to do this work, it's inside, it's not on the outside. The outside that is the world of man. This in here is the true work of God, Jesus. That's why Jesus said the temple of, the kingdom of God lies within you. That's what Jesus is talking about. Honey, I believe anything that Jesus comes in because I saw Jesus and Jesus is very much alive right here because that's the way it is. You can heal yourself, but you got to get out of your own way. You got to get out. This brain only thinks in the world of man. My heart and soul thinks of a whole different way, and I know that I can do it. I did leave my family in 2003, and Spirit, God, literally said, you need to leave now because it was very much domestic violence. And I was like a social worker as well as a teacher. And this boy said, you need to leave now because they're going to hurt you. And my oldest son, he doesn't remember any of this. He doesn't even like to talk about it. He said, I don't remember that well. I remember it very well because he came down to hit me. And he couldn't get past my higher consciousness. Couldn't. And Spirit literally said, turn around and leave now. And the back door opened up by itself. And that door opened, and I walked out. I mean, and all God kept telling me is, don't look back. Don't look back. Because if you look back, then you go back into where you're going in. And I wouldn't. You can feel everything in your body, but you've got to get out of your own way. We get too much going on in the mind, and we got too much clutter. If you got a whole lot of clutter, you're not going to be able to do what I do because I had to learn how to stop everything. I had to completely empty my mind, totally. And then these great experiences would come through, like a movie. It would come through, and I'd think, oh my gosh. Like if I'm working and all of a sudden somebody's face just shows up, it's usually my client. I just pick up the phone and call. They said, how'd you know? How'd you know? I said, because I felt you. They said, what is it like when you feel me? I said, I saw your face. So, yeah, it's the most incredible thing I've ever done. I mean, I've done some amazing things, believe me. But to do this work, nah, I would not trade anything.
Thank you so much for watching this video on TNH Afterlife. We're so grateful to have such an amazing audience, and your comments always make me so happy and interested. My name is Lauren, and if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to TNH Afterlife. I can't wait to share more near-death experience stories that can change your perspective on life and death.